This is Chapter 7 of The First Stone. The courtroom was packed. As soon as they'd arrived, Carl Barker had hurried directly into the courthouse, his postman pants making sandpaper sounds as he'd threaded his way inside. Unlike Carl, Reeve hadn't been worried about getting a seat, the one advantage of being the guilty party. He turned now to look at the crowd and saw there was standing room only, most of which was occupied by numerous reporters at the back. The one bigger had threatened on steps gave him a hard smile, but Reeve ignored him. Sitting on the left, a few rows in front of Carl, were the man and woman in the newspaper photo. The woman was looking directly at him, as if trying to fry him with laser vision. He looked away, continued scanning the crowd. Scar and Bigger waved from seats very near the back, but Jinx wasn't there, and wouldn't be. Reeve had told them so when they'd spoken outside. "Why isn't he here?" Scar had demanded. "Jinx got his own troubles right now. He don't need more of mine." "What happened?" "Cops picked him up last night for the disturbing peace, fighting at Rowdy's." "There's always fights at Rowdy's," Bigger had added. "Usually Bigger and the floor shows at the dump." "This time," Reeve said. "The cops got there before it broke up, and they nailed Jinx for drinking underage. They shut the place down." "Jesus," Scar muttered. "How could Jinx be so stupid?" "I know," agreed Reeve. "Rowdy may lose his liquor license," he told Jinx. "He better hope it don't happen." Reeve knew that losing the income from the rundown joint called Rowdy's would be no hardship for its owner. Jinx had said many times that Rowdy didn't have a hell of a lot of the few booze hounds that frequent the place anyway. It was the bar itself that Rowdy needed. It was a front for more than a dozen shady operations that attracted more police attention than almost any other place in the city. Everyone knew the cops had been trying for years to find a way to shut it down, even citing the place for health code violations. But a rumor that Rowdy had a friend in the health department seemed to have proven true when the violations were suddenly rescinded. Now Jinx had handled them, a gift that, combined with all the other infractions, could very well be the one to close Rowdy's for good. Bigger had whistled, softly under his breath. "I wouldn't want Rowdy and his goons looking for me." If the situation had been so grim, Reeve would have chuckled. "That's why I told Jinx to stay put." He told him, "The cops don't need him to connected with this. Don't need another reason to put the screws to him." So Jinx would miss the big show, somewhere where the hearts bleeding purple all rise. Reeve turned to see Judge Thomas enter the courtroom, her black robe making her tiny frame seem even smaller. For a bizarre moment she looked a bit like Nan, but then looked again and the illusion was gone. She was just a short woman with a long coat and the power to put him away for months. But so what? What don't kill you makes you stronger. And then there was life lesson number 2. Happens looking at Judge Thomas, Reeve was reminded that it's a whole lot better being than the something else his grandfather used to say. Reeve ignored the court clerk's opening crap about the presiding judge and the court proceeding. He'd heard all of it so many times he could recite a chapter and verse. He glanced at Hank Elliott, who must have heard hundreds of court now in session intros, but the lawyer appeared to be listening intently, as though it were his very first time. The guy was a trained chimp. "You may be seated. About time," thought Reeve, as everyone settled in their seats. "Let's get this show on the road." The judge perched a chair of darkened-rimmed glasses on the end of her nose and opened a thick file. She paged through it silently, as if entering each piece of paper in some photographic memory bank. Reeve got the feeling, though she knew every detail of the file already, that this was a performance just for his benefit. "Well, you, Judge, it takes more than a dwarf in a black bathrobe to scare me." Judge Thomas closed the file and leaned back in her chair. At that angle, her eyes barely topped the judge's bench, and Reeve grinned as he imagined her feet dangling above the floor. His grin did not go unnoticed. The judge frowned. "Counsel, would you and your client please stand?" Elliot stood so quickly that Reeve wondered if there was a spring-loaded ejection device in the lawyer's seat. Reef ambled to his feet. Chat Arthur Kennedy. Under Section 430 of the Criminal Code, you are guilty of 2 counts of mischief resulting in the vandalism of a privately owned truck and an accident that damaged 6 vehicles and injured 3 people, one of them seriously. A murmur rippled across the courtroom, and Reef could hear a few people mutter their disgust as if all this were a big surprise. Had he pleaded guilty almost 3 weeks ago? What a show! The judge waited for silence, which fell almost immediately. Do you have anything to wish to say? Reef had plenty to say, but Elliot, who chosen not to have him testify for that very reason, had him promise he would keep quiet, even made him practice the 5 words a few times. No, Your Honor, I don't. Well then, she continued, I am prepared at this time to sentence you. Another ripple, this one lasting longer than the first. Thomas glared at the spectators, and silence returned to the courtroom. This case has attracted the attention of the general public, as well as many members of the media. All of us here have seen many editorials in the paper and on television regarding the need to get low on youth crime, to make examples of perpetrators on these horrendous acts that will deter others from performing similarly in the future. Reef watched as her lips moved, but he no longer heard what she was saying. Words, words, words. Meaningless, like the keep out signs on the pit. His whole life had been a keep out sign. He'd listened to it, described in detail, over the last few days as though listening to people talk about someone else, someone not even in the room. Elliot had called 3 people to speak in his defense. The first was Royce Gould, a social worker, who gave a detailed account of poverty of Reef's early childhood, the emotional abuse he'd endured from an alcoholic grandparent, the short-lived experiences in numerous foster homes since he was 9. Next was Carl Barker, who offered, in Carl's eyes anyway, a valuable insight into life spent with troubled teens. The last person was a surprise. Alvria Gregory, his 8th grade English teacher, who commented on Reef's vast potential as a student, potential that upon cross-examination the Crown Attorney had shown to be unfulfilled. But the court are not institutions to be manipulated by public opinion. If the public is dissatisfied with a law, it is the duty of each citizen to become actively involved in the repeal of amendment of the law. The forum for discussions such as these parliaments or the provincial legislature, not the courtroom. Reef had no idea what she was talking about, but he could sense movement behind him, the reporters at the back. The judge paused again, was rewarded with silence, then continued, despite the fact that the public is demanding stiffer punishments. I firmly believe that the punishment is not the way to dissuade individuals like yourself from committing crimes such as this one. Numerous studies have shown that incarceration of young people only lead to further instances of criminal behavior. A case in point is your own prior stay at the Riverview Correctional Institution. A moment passed, and when she spoke again, she addressed the spectators. More important than fear of punishment is need for compassion, the need for better choices, the need for young people who commit crimes to recognize that they are and will continue to be members of a society, and that the actions of everybody in the society impact some way on every other member. More movement at the back. Reef could hear pens scratching furiously on notepads. Where was this going? The Youth Criminal Justice Act recognizes that there is no quick fix to youth crime. It supports constructive long-term solutions intended to foster values of respect and accountability. At the heart of the act, it's the principle that criminal behavior will result in meaningful consequences. The judge took off her glasses and folded them carefully, placed them on the file in front of her before continuing. She turned again to Reef. Mr. Kennedy, she said, you have pleaded guilty to criminal acts, and in doing so have saved the court considerable time and expense. However, you have not shown remorse for your actions. She shook her head sadly. In fact, from what I've seen in this courtroom, you have demonstrated no concern whatsoever for what you have done. She paused. I believe that you need to experience the results of such actions firsthand, so you will understand the ramifications and hopefully learn to make better choices in the future. I am assigning you to the North Hills Group Home, where you will live for the next 12 months under the supervision of Mr. Frank Colville. When school begins again in the fall, you will attend classes at Bonavista High School, where you will work to your potential. She picked up her glasses and brandished them at Reef. And you will work, young man. Teachers face enough problems in their classroom without having to deal with people who are sentenced to school. Miss Rita Hamilton, principal of Bonavista, has agreed to report directly to me every 2 weeks on your performance, and I will be expecting to hear positive news. If I don't, you'll find yourself standing in front of me again. There was now a buzz in the courtroom, and the judge bristled. If I have to clear this courtroom to be heard, I'll do it, she snapped. The room felt silent again. During the school year, you'll attend classes and take part in at least 2 extracurricular activities. Judging from the distance you threw that rock, I'd suggest you to try track and field events, like shot put and javelin. There was sudden laughter from the back of the room, and the judge shot a stern look at the people who had produced it. Returning her attention to Reef, she resumed, beginning this summer and continuing through the school year, you will volunteer your help at one of the city's rehabilitation centers on 2 weekdays, afternoons or evenings, and every other Saturday. You will learn intimately what suffering is all about, young man. Many of the people in those facilities suffer from crippling illnesses. Others are victims of trauma caused by a variety of accidents, including motor vehicles mishaps resulting from careless actions, such as your own. She leaned forward. When Miss Colville feels you are ready, you will conduct a series of presentations to high school classes and youth groups telling about your experiences and the insight you've gained as a result of them. And believe me, young man, you will gain insight. You will feel more remorse. I'm going to make you certain of that. Reef blinked at her. Extracurricular activities? Volunteering at rehabs? Youth groups? Was the woman crazy? I could see from your reaction, Mr. Kennedy, that you're not thrilled with my ruling. She glanced around the room. Many others will not doubt to share that reaction, but for very different reasons. There's nothing I could do about that. However, what I could do is try my best to ensure that you become a productive citizen. I'll be watching you, Chad, and it's my hope that when you complete your sentence, you'll have a new appreciation for the people with whom you share this planet. She's out of her goddamn mind, Reef muttered, as the courtroom implied. Shut up, Elliot hissed. He told Reef to remain seated, and the two were now alone except for the handful of people that court security officers was still ushering out. That, however, wouldn't last long. They still had to run the gauntlet of reporters on the steps outside. You don't know how lucky you are. That line again. Reef snarled as he got to his feet. Elliot glanced around as he stood up, saw no one within earshot, and spoke through clenched teeth. Now you listen to me. I have clients who give $8, so last thing I need is to waste more time with the likes of you. But I want you to understand one thing. Judge Thomas could have crucified you. Instead, she gave you a second chance. Don't screw it up. Chance to do what? Improve my public speaking? Give me a break. Reef turned away, savagely, kicked a nearby chair so it flipped over backwards and crashed it to the floor. Elliot's voice was low, but that didn't make the venom in his response. You don't get it, do you? You've just been given a break. You get to walk out of here and make a difference in your life. That is, if you have the guts to do it. Reef riled to his face. What do you know about guts? I could kick your from here to Sunday. It was out of Reef's mouth before he realized where that line had come from. His grandfather. The lawyer shook his head. That's the problem with you, Reef, he said as he reached down and pulled the chair upright. Courage and kicking aren't the same thing. Maybe that's something you'll learn in the next 12 months. If not, he sighed, I expect I'll see you here again. He opened his briefcase, slid his files inside, and took a deep breath. Now comes the hard part. Mr. Elliot, what's your response to the judge's ruling? The throng of people around Reef and his lawyer was overwhelming, and questions came quickly. Of course, we're pleased, replied Elliot, as he and Reef made their way down the courthouse steps. As instructed, Reef said nothing. He kept his hands inside his jacket pockets so reporters wouldn't see his fists, clenching, loosening, clenching again. He scanned the area for Scar and Bigger and spied them waiting across the street. Scar waved to him. Surprised? Called the reporters, whom Bigger had confronted. We think the judge was fair, Elliot replied. An angry sob rose from another knot of people on the steps below them, and a woman's voice shouted, Fair? It was anything but fair. Reef's glance slid across several faces, and he saw, surrounded by television cameras, the man and woman he'd seen in the newspaper and in the courtroom every day. The man had one arm around the woman's waist, supporting her as she spoke through tears. That ruling was a slap in the face, she sobbed. My daughter is lying in a hospital bed with injuries to more than half of her body. And that animal, she pointed at Reef, was sentenced to be a volunteer? For Christ's sake, can anyone call that fair? A number of spectators watching from the sidewalk shook their head and muttered, and Reef could hear grumbled comments like lousy punk and goddamn psychopath. One individual, who obviously had come prepared, held up a sign that said, I am offended by youth offenders. Reef pulled one hand out of his jacket to flash them all the fingers, but Elliot gripped him by the shoulder and hurried him down the steps, past the cameras, the crowd, the hysterical woman,